friend. Folks, thank you and welcome to the City Winery here in Atlanta. It is truly my honor and privilege to be with you here this evening. Before we begin, what I'd like to do is just take a quick moment to thank the friendly folks here that are serving you and providing you food and drinks in this wonderful place and having us here. So if I could just get a real quick round of applause for the friendly staff. Thank you very much, City Winery. Really, thank you so much. Two, before we actually begin the presentation, I would like to ask you all a question. And by the way, this is going to be very interactive, right? So you will, as the audience, be involved with this. This is not just me up here yammering. It's important. This is going to be really a conversation. And I want to make sure this is a conversation that we're all part of. And so, yes, I might pick on you once in a while, so be prepared. But what I'd like to do, first of all, if I could please see a show of hands of anybody who's either former or current military, please raise your hand. Please keep them up. Thank you. We're going to get to that. Keep your hands up. Anybody who is either current or former law enforcement, please raise your hands and keep them up. Anybody here who is a current or former first responder, paramedic, or even a nurse, raise your hands. Thank you very much. And last but certainly not least, anybody here who has either been formerly or currently a teacher, please raise your hands. Thank you for your service to our nation. It is deeply appreciated. So, okay, folks, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about UAPs. A lot's been going on lately. I see a hand over there. Thank you for your service, sir. A lot's going on, folks. And a lot's going on not because of me, but because of you. We are at a point right now with our government where they're taking this topic very, very seriously. And they're taking it seriously not because of me. They're taking it because each and every one of you having the conversations that you're having with your friends, your family, calling members of Congress, writing Congress, right? And then telling the media that you want more information, it's okay, it's safe to have a conversation and have news about this topic, a topic that was fraught with a lot of stigma and taboo for a very long time, which was very unnecessary. We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight too. So before we talk actually about UAPs, I've got a little quiz for you. What I'd like you to do is take a look at this next slide and think to yourself, what do these individuals have in common? Take a moment, take a look at them. Yes, besides the fact that they're all dead, I know. Yes, they're not here. These are individuals that are separated by geography, in some cases a millennia or two in time. They are different genders, they are different races, right? What do they all have in common? Anybody? By the way, don't be shy in here, we're all family. Good, innovation, what'd you say? That's right. That's right, they challenged the status quo. Lest we forget, right, how we do science and how we do academia today. I often put this up for my friends in academia, which, by the way, I myself was in the science and the medical program at the University of Miami. I consider myself a disciple of the scientific method and principles, okay? But this is how you do science, you question it. Lest we forget the lessons of the past when there was a time where we thought that to help cure anemia, we would use leeches, right? To suck the blood and remove the blood of people who already don't have enough blood. There was a time we thought that a good therapeutic resource for depression was a frontal lobotomy, right? That's true. So we have to challenge the status quo. And especially when you're dealing with a topic like this, regarding UAP, something that is not very well understood and it's already come with a lot of unnecessary baggage, right? We have to be willing to ask the hard questions. So to do that, I want to go ahead and try to help you kind of think a little bit outside the box. Okay? We are now at a point in time in our human evolution where we have something called artificial intelligence, something magnificent. For the first time in human history, we can now leverage technology to help us peer behind the green curtain and look at this topic in a way that we've never been able to do before. So what I'm going to do with you right now, I'm going to share with you a real case study we did These are some of the advantages of AI, which I just kind of mentioned. I'm not going to belabor this point, but I'm going to share with you a case study. Now, what you're about to see here is a real video. It's an authentic video taken by a U.S. military service member, a major in the United States Army, on a military installation. I won't say which one, but it was in California in the desert. And what this officer, Major 04 officer, reported was something very strange. So strange, in fact, that he decided he would go ahead and take a movie. Now, this was in a part of the base, a sensitive part of the base where you really weren't allowed to take video, so you could get into a lot of trouble. But he reported seeing this interesting black flying disc hovering eerily on the horizon, so much so that he felt compelled to take a video. And so what we did is we had artificial intelligence analyze it. So here's the video. Okay, now due to compression, it's a little grainy, but if you keep watching, you're going to see he zooms into a portion of the field here with a little black, kind of like a little, looks like kind of like a saucer, really. And what happens here is when we go ahead and we freeze the film, there it is over there. That's right. Whoa. Wow. Well, that sure looks like a black flying disc to me, right? So let's see what happens when artificial intelligence looks at this, right? So we had the algorithms look at this picture, and it noticed that there were some inconsistencies in the background of this photograph in the video than the foreground. The pixelation was a little different. Now, it hasn't been altered. This is a real video. It's not a fake video, but there's some interesting differences in the geometry of the objects in the background versus the foreground. And then we asked the artificial intelligence to take a look at this black saucer, and it notices something the human eye can't pick up. By the way, if you don't hear me okay back there?
Yeah.
Okay, if you need me to speak up, I certainly can. So it notices these, what looked, I guess, to the artificial intelligence like some sort of struts or perhaps landing gear poking out from the peripheral of this object. So then we asked artificial intelligence, okay, well, in your best guesstimate, what are we looking at in the background? And all of a sudden it says, well, with a 94% certainty, we're looking at the tail of a C-17 Globemaster cargo plane. On the left is going to be a tail of a Joint Strike Fighter F-35 Lightning, and on the right looks like two aircraft passing. So what we're looking at here is probably an airfield on a military installation, which makes sense, right? Okay, so we're looking at some air operations. So then we asked the artificial intelligence, okay, what about the flying disc, this black disc hovering? What do you make of that? That's what it is. It's a tent. It's an Army GP medium tent with the sides rolled up. It is not a flying saucer at all. That's right. Now, why did I demonstrate this for you and why did I show this to you, right? Because we all want to talk about UAPs, not tents. Because when you're speaking to members of Congress, you're speaking to members of an administration, you have an obligation, a responsibility to do your due diligence. Meaning, we have to be our own worst critic. Imagine if this picture, this video were to come out onto the wild. For 30 years, people would be talking about, oh, look, the U.S. government's hiding a UFO, right? That's not at all the case. In this case, it's just a tent. So we have to do our due diligence, folks. We have to avoid the temptation, because seeing something you want to see, because what you want to see may not actually be what really is. And so that's very important. We have to force ourselves, we have to train ourselves to really resist that urge. And it's tough, I know, but we have to. So let's do a little mental exercise.
Yeah, so what?
I'll let these young ladies here serve. Forgive me if I'm getting anybody's way. So what I'd like to do is have you all, for the next 5 seconds, in your mind, and by the way, this is a trick question, so don't raise your hands. Okay? I'm going to ask you a question, but don't raise your hands. Name is type of ship. So everybody has time to think about that? Okay, so, again, don't raise your hand, please. How many of you thought of a ship like this, a cruise ship or a sailing ship, right? If you did, give yourself a D. Okay? That's why I said don't raise your hands. How many of you thought of an airship, like a dirigible, a blimp, right, a balloon? Again, don't raise your hands, because if you did, give yourself a D+. How many of you thought of a spaceship, like a Space Shuttle Columbia or a Star Trek spaceship, right? However of you thought of that, give yourself a C-. Now, How many of you find there's friendship or censorship, right? Notice I didn't tell you what type of ship. I didn't say mean a certain kind of, just think to yourself. And automatically, most people gravitate to one of the three examples I just showed, right? So we have to think outside of the box. We have to. And now we're talking about a topic like UAP, UFOs in the vernacular, where there's so much stigma already associated with it. So I want to do a little test with you guys, if I can, if you don't mind, if I have your permission. We're going to talk about social stigma and taboo, and how we are pre-programmed, we're socialized to turn away from things that we don't understand. And it's almost automatic, it's almost actually instinctive. So the word para, we use it a lot. It's a prefix in the English language. It's actually a Latin-based word that means above or beside. And we use it all the time when we're having a discussion with our friends and our families and our teachers. And so for those of you, when I say parachute, right, those of you former military or current military, you think of a device that deploys over your head, helps you hit the ground with a thump and hopefully not a thud. And so that's what you think of. Nothing bad, parachute, right? And to our wonderful and brave, courageous first responders, when I say the word paramedic, right? What do you think of? You think of a first responder, a medical professional that's above or beside you, providing you some sort of life-saving function, and this is what we think of. Right? Now, how about this word? When I say paranormal. Oh, you just proved my point. That's right. Some of you kind of cock your head slyly, maybe have a little bit of a smiley. What do you mean paranormal? I mean paranormal. What I mean is that everything by definition in science is paranormal until it becomes normal. Yep. The cell phones that you use, the laptops that you're on, Wi-Fi signals, all that. Let's not forget that technology, as Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficient advanced technology would appear like magic to us. Right? So let's talk about some things that were historically considered paranormal in the past. Right? We think of this as paranormal. Weird things, Ouija boards, right? And interesting people that are doing seances and things like that. In reality, let's try that again. Concepts once considered paranormal. Solar and lunar eclipses, just ask the Maya, right? Who could predict it with such certainty? And it seemed supernatural. It wasn't, it's just astrophysics. Photography, Yanomami tribe, out in the Brazilian rainforest, in Amazon. They thought taking their soul. And this gentleman here is not very happy he's having his photograph taken. Right? Acupuncture, you know, there was a time when I was in a medical program at the University of Miami. My professor actually told me that acupuncture was Eastern voodoo magic. It was nonsensical, it didn't work. It was some sort of Eastern medicine that was paranormal. Guess what? Now, at the Department of Veterans Affairs, we actually prescribe acupuncture to our disabled veterans for pain therapy. It is not paranormal. It is medical. It's a medical procedure that we just did not understand. Even just 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Men who hypnotize chickens, right? Tonic immobility. It's not paranormal, it's biology. The same concept when you have a shark and if you scuba dive, you flip a shark upside down on his back and it kind of goes to sleep. Same thing with an alligator. It's a neurological effect. It's biology. It's not paranormal, right? The problem is that society has told you the word paranormal is weird, and they put the UAP topic in that category. And they do that, which creates a stigma and a taboo to the point where we automatically, just like we did here when we said paranormal, well, what you mean paranormal, right? We can't even have a conversation about it because there's even stigma on the word paranormal. So, if you want to really consider the profoundness of where we are right now in the conversation of UAP and UFOs, we need to understand that our perception of reality is extremely limited. There was a time during the late Renaissance period, during Isaac Newton, where he discovered physics. It could explain the physical world using mathematics and could predict motion. Force equals mass times acceleration, things like that. And then back in this earlier part of the century, some crazy cat with weird hair, right, named Einstein, all of a sudden proposes the idea that space and time are connected. Forget Newtonian physics. Let's talk about relativity. Space and time are actually connected. And in fact, space and time is stretchable and compressible. And in fact, you can't have one without the other. And as mind-bending as that, in the 1930s, comes the understanding and the introduction of quantum physics, proving that you actually can be in two places at once. Just ask the electron, right? So our fundamental understanding of the universe itself is always evolving, it's always changing. And we have to recognize that. We are 5 fundamental senses by which we judge the universe. And if you can't touch it, taste it, hear it, smell it, etc., you'll never be able to know it's there, right? Let's take the visible light spectrum. Visible light spectrum is a very narrow sliver of the greater electromagnetic spectrum. In fact, as you can see here, it's only 0.0035%, which is a little tiny little fraction. In fact, most of the universe lies beyond our ability to see it. Let's take, for example, if you had cell phone vision. Imagine if you could see in Wi-Fi, in G5 and G4, and GPS and AM and FM. You would see an entirely fundamental different reality around you. And as an example of that, let's take a look at this. This is a picture of a celestial object in the visible light spectrum versus the infrared spectrum. Now, the infrared spectrum is just one tiny step down from visible red light, right? And then all of a sudden you see gaseous clouds, you see nebula, you see stars, right? Most of the universe lies beyond our ability to perceive it. Most of the universe. And then you also have a size issue. You have a scale issue. We humans are infinitesimally small when you compare it to the size of our universe. Now I'm going to show you a few slides here to kind of drive that point home before we start really talking about UFOs and UAPs here. Because I want you to kind of think outside the box when we start having this conversation. Any of you guys know what the pale blue dot is? Anybody out there? Great. What is it, sir? That's right. It's a selfie. The Voyager spacecraft was turned around in the 1990s, early 90s, and told to take a picture of home. Everything you've ever learned, every person in history that's ever lived or existed, every war that's ever been fought, every person that's ever loved, every person that's ever died, every friend, neighbor, all exist on that tiny blue dot, floating in the vastness of space around some obscure star, around some obscure galaxy, amongst hundreds and trillions of other galaxies. This is another picture of Earth taken from the rings of Saturn. That's it, a couple pixels big, that's it. Right? Pretty small, pretty insignificant. And so as we see here, what do we see when we turn our satellites and our space telescopes that are on these really cool spaceships out there in the middle of a heliocentric orbit, something like, let's say, the Webb telescope. When we look at a part of the sky that's black, it's dark, in fact, our best telescopes up to this point, when we focus on the inky blackness of this one part of the universe that seems empty, all of a sudden now we have technology and we actually look at this, see what's it, is it really empty? That's what we see. And by the way, these are not stars, folks, these are galaxies with hundreds of billions of stars in each galaxy. In fact, the visible universe is so huge, and by the way, notice I emphasize visible versus the rest, the real size of the universe. The visible size of the universe contains more than 200 sextillion or 200 billion trillion stars. Now, those are a lot of zeros. It's hard to wrap your head around exactly that type of number. So, in other words, let's look at it this way. There are more stars in the observable universe, again, observable, than there are grains of sand in all the beaches in all the world. And now I say observable universe. Why? Because the real universe is actually much bigger. The known horizon, visible horizon of the universe in any particular direction is about 14.5 billion light years. What's a light year? Well, it's the distance a photon of light can travel in a year. And exactly how fast is that? Well, it's 186,000 miles per second, or roughly 7.5 times around our planet in 1 second. Now imagine how far a photon of light can go in a week. Imagine how far it can go in a year. And now multiply that by 14.5 billion in all directions. The problem is the universe is so big and expanding so fast that light beyond that will never reach Earth. And in fact, scientists and astrophysicists now speculate that the known observable universe may be even less than 10% of the actual size of the universe. So think how big that is and how small we are, right? And yet, as hard as that is to comprehend, right? So this is the size of the universe. The point to this slide, look at the bottom number. 4.344 times 10 to the 26. But guess what? How many of you took chemistry in high school? Pretty much we all had to, right? Actually, I like my teacher. It's pretty good. Mr. Domingue. Guys remember Avogadro's number? That's Avogadro's number. We're going to talk about that right now. 6.022 times 10 to the negative 23. That is a hydrogen atom. That is the size of 1 proton, 1 neutron, and 1 electron of a hydrogen atom. In fact, that is almost roughly the same order of magnitude that atom is to us as we are to the universe. We sit right in the middle of the scale of the universe. And we as human beings can only interact with 1 or 2 orders of degree magnitude, up or down. Otherwise, the universe is simply too big or too small. You'll never be able to interact with it or really truly perceive it. So, then let's talk about your topic, UFOs. Now that we kind of went through this little mental exercise and we have to kind of force ourselves out of our current way of thinking, okay? The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, it's a real program you paid for. You paid $22 million of your hardworking taxpayer dollars to support this program. And a lot came out. Some people pretend that it never focused on UFOs. Really? Okay, well, here are the 3 videos that most people see related to AATIP that we were responsible for releasing to the public at the unclassified level. Know that there are hundreds and hundreds of other videos that are at the 4K ultra high definition. In fact, we have videos where these things are 15 feet away from the cockpit, and they're not grainy. They're as clear as I am to you right now on this stage. Okay? This is the actual AATIP contract focus. So let there be no doubt, because this is actually open source. You can actually pull up, if you know where to look, the actual AATIP contract focus. And I actually put an Easter egg here, because if you look at the very background that's kind of hidden, that kind of fuzzy writing, that's the actual contract. But these are the focus areas. Now look at the 3rd bullet down. I think I got a laser pointer here. Let's see. I'm going to hit the wrong button. There we go. This one. Investigate legitimacy of currently observed what? Phenomenon. Not technology, phenomenon. That is in the contract. We're not talking about planes, folks. We're talking about UAP. So, what were some of the results of AATIP? And by the way, I can't take credit for this because a whole lot of people were part of this. In intelligence, which I was a senior intelligence officer, in order to do intelligence, you have to first of all take a baseline of existing technologies and observations. You have to compare that and contrast that to the data that you're picking up. And when you have things that are performing outside, well outside the normal parameters of current technology and current capabilities, then you say, aha, that's truly unique. So there were 5 performance observables and 1 other observable. It was an effect observable, but let's talk about the 5 observables. And they're right here. Instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, transmedium travel, right? Low observability, anti-gravity. I know it's a bad word in science, I know. Anti-gravity. Let's talk about this for a little bit. And why is it important from a national security perspective that we figure this out? Because if we're seeing it, it can be done. Someone's doing it, but we can't. So maybe we can look at this a little differently. So let's look at these observables. Instantaneous acceleration. Okay. Let's take this little clicker here, pretend this is an airplane. There are 4 fundamental principles of flight: thrust, lift, drag, and weight. And if you understand those, you can build wings and create lift. And as long as you have thrust, you will fly. In fact, that's what I got to come here today to see you. I took an airplane. There's really only few ways that we know how to do that, and instantaneous acceleration is the ability to change velocity very quickly. And we as human beings, to put that in perspective, we can withstand about 9 g-forces, 9 equivalents to the force of gravity on our bodies for a very short duration period of time before we start suffering medical consequences. Things like blackouts and redouts and ultimately death. Right? We're kind of fragile. And if you compare that to some of our more sophisticated technology, like, let's say, it's an older platform, but still one of our most highly maneuverable manned aircraft, is the General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon. That, at the unclassified level, can perform about 17 to 18 g-forces before you start having structural failure, meaning wings begin to snap off and the airframe begins to disintegrate around you. Right? We're not talking about 19 and 20 Gs. We're talking about objects that we have recorded pulling 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 g-forces, well above the limitations of anything biological to withstand, and certainly beyond our ability from an engineering perspective. Okay? And if you can do that, these are the reasons on the right here why it's important. Right? Thrust vectoring and G-force protection and high maneuverability, things that we would need to remain competitive on the battle space. By the way, I'm not warmongering here, I'm just telling you why your government is interested in this. Right? There's real reasons, not that I'm just curious about these things flying around. No, we want to be able to do the same thing. Right? Hypersonic velocity. Hypersonics are defined by velocities in excess of Mach 5. What's Mach? Mach is the speed of sound, roughly 768 miles an hour at sea level, plus or minus, given barometric pressure. So it's really fast. Now, do we have hypersonic vehicles? We do. In fact, we have one that most people are kind of aware of. It's a Lockheed YF-12A SR-71 Blackbird, right? They're really cool, sleek, sexy plane that we use to spy. That does about 3,200 miles an hour. But when the SR-71, when the Blackbird wants to take a right-hand turn, it takes roughly half the state of Ohio to do it. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing objects that can do not just 3,500 miles an hour, but they can do 10,000, 13,000 miles an hour in a low Earth atmosphere environment and pull immediate right-angle turns and 180-degree turns. Right? And this is why it's important. For these reasons, the government wants to know how that's done. Okay, low observability. Do we have low observable? We do. This is a perfect example. The F-117 Night Strike, the Night Fighter, in this particular case, the B-2 bomber and the Valkyrie, right? But these are only low observable with radar. But you still see them. They're still pretty easy to see. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where pilots say, Lou, I don't know how to explain it. My radar was getting these returns and it was being jammed. And when I looked at the object, I saw it, but I can't describe it. It didn't have wings. It didn't have control surfaces, rudders, ailerons. Hell, it didn't even have a cockpit. But there it was flying, right? Low observability. Not quite sure what you're looking at. And these are some of the reasons why we want to know. Transmedium travel, what is that? Well, it's a fancy way of saying it has the ability to operate in multiple environments simultaneously. Now, do we have transmedium or multimedium vehicles? We do, of course we do. In fact, anyone who's been to the Caribbean or maybe on a pontoon boat up in Alaska will tell you, we have planes that can float and they can fly. But let's face it, a seaplane's neither a really good boat or a plane. Now, why is that? Well, because it's a design compromise and a performance compromise. The more environments you want to operate in, the more compromises you have to make, right? But that's not what we're seeing here. We are seeing objects that have the ability to perform in our atmosphere, underwater, and even in space, without those associated performance compromises. And why is that important? Again, here on the right, this is really important for any country who has that ability. We want to do it too. And of course, bad word in science, anti-gravity. Look, there's only 3 fundamental ways we know how to defy the natural effects of Earth's gravity. Only 3. One is through what I said, flight, right? So thrust, lift, drag, and weight. Another one is through buoyancy, right? You have a cavity, and inside that cavity, the density is less than the density outside that cavity, and it will rise to a point of equilibrium. So think of a hot air balloon, think of a helium balloon, right? That's what I'm talking about. An aerostat, perhaps. And then the last way we know how to defy Earth's gravity is through sheer ballistics, right? What is ballistics? Force equals mass times acceleration. If I take a baseball and I throw it with enough energy, it will go up before it comes back down. Think of an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, right? That's why I say ballistic missile. Put enough powder behind, or enough charge behind a missile, and you can shoot it up into space before it falls back down. But those are really the only three ways we know how to defy Earth's gravity, and that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about objects that don't have any wings, no obvious signs of propulsion, and yet they're able to not only defy Earth's gravity, but actually outperform anything we have in our current inventory. So, is that a problem? Well, it is from a national security perspective, certainly so. What else did your money pay for at AATIP? Well, you might be surprised to know, maybe not, that we conducted 37 studies. Now, when I say we, it wasn't me. I mean, real scientists, right? I was just an intelligence officer. I'm talking real, like, some of the top tier astrophysicists at the CIA, at the Department of Defense. We're talking about real, even in some cases, we had some theoretical physicists involved, and I'm talking world renowned. So I'm going to go through a few of these so you can see for yourselves what we were studying. And by the way, this is open source. This has been released by the Pentagon, right? So I'm going to take a couple minutes here and go through some of these for you, just so you can see, point a few out. Biomaterials. That's interesting. Space access, right? Invisibility and cloaking. Well, we talked a little bit about that, right? Low observability. Now things start to get kind of interesting. Warp drive, dark energy, and the manipulation of extra dimensions. Well, that's certainly not an airplane, is it? That's something else. Traversable wormholes, stargates, and negative energy. These are, by the way, real studies. You pay for with real results. Let's look at number 25 here. An introduction to the statistics of the Drake equation. Anybody know what the Drake equation is? Right. Okay, so excellent. For those who don't, it is an equation, a statistical analysis of the likelihood of intelligent life in our cosmos. That's what it is. Okay. Laser light craft nanosatellites. Let's look at a few others here. These are real. That's what your money paid for. What we were trying to understand and ascertain was what are the critical technologies responsible for these 5 observables. How many things would you have to do in order to replicate what they're doing? And it wasn't until 2015 we had the proverbial aha moment. Let me specify again. It wasn't me, it was a scientist. I was actually in a skiff, I remember very clearly the day, and one of the PhDs walked in and said, we got to talk to you right now. Like, look, I'm a little busy, putting warheads on foreheads. Nope, need you right now. And so I didn't mean to seem crass, but that's what we do. So they pulled me into the vault, and for about 3 hours I went over this mathematical equation, very comprehensive. By the way, for the record, I suck at math. I got up to count 3 and I thought I was going to die. So we're talking very advanced mathematics. And at the end, I remember looking at a couple of the PhDs and one of the astrophysicists, and I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, look, we have figured out that every single one of these observables are a manifestation of a single capability. Meaning, if you can do one thing, all these other observables now become possible. And that was super revelatory, because for the first time we had this almost unifying theory of how is this possible. And furthermore, even more exciting, it may even explain the specific morphology, the shapes of UFOs and how they operate and how they work and the technology that's being used. So let's talk about that a little bit. And it all comes down to gravity. Something as simple as gravity. What is gravity? It's a particle? Is it a force? Is it a field? I mean, I think of Newton, right? The apple falling from the tree as being gravity, but you know what? It's not. That's an effect of gravity. Gravity is actually, as we now know through Einstein, is the warping of space-time. The warping of space-time to what? Mass or energy. You can warp, believe it or not. Space-time, 2 different ways. And if you want proof of that, I'll give you a perfect example. When we first implemented the GPS satellite system, I was actually one of the fielding guys with special operations way early on to determine if we could use it in a combat situation. We started noticing something very funny. The way GPS works is you have these satellites that are around up in space, and you have a ground station on the ground, and it uses timing, an atomic clock, actually an atomic cesium clock, that runs exactly the same way as any other atomic cesium clock, because there's a very specific half-life, an atomic decay rate. So if you have an atomic cesium clock here and one over here, they should always operate precisely the same. But we noticed after a week or two that the atomic clocks on the satellites were actually running at a different rate than the ground station. How is that possible? Because they're the exact same clock. And in fact, if we did not go back and adjust for this atomic drift, within a few weeks, you might want to go to New York with your GPS and wind up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That. So it was problematic. It turned out that it was actually the ground station. The issue was with the ground station. The further you are to a massive object, i.e. Earth, the more space-time is warped. There was actually nothing wrong with the clock at all. It was running exactly like it was supposed to. The problem is that Earth was perturbing space-time more dramatically for the clock on the ground than the satellites because they're further away. And we know that warping space-time, bear with me here for a minute, we know that warping space-time can also be done by using a whole lot of energy. And allow me to explain. A lot of people hear the cliche of the formula of Einstein's E equals mc squared, but it was actually very revelatory. It's not just a formula. It's actually an understanding that energy and mass are coefficients of each other. They can be interchangeable. You can swap them. In fact, for those of you who are drinking water right now, you might think of mass as the ice in your cup, and you might think of energy as steam. They're both water, but they're in two different states, two different phases. And so what happens when you take matter and you annihilate it? You get pure energy. That's what an atomic bomb is. It's a nuclear bomb is. And if I take energy and I slow it down at the CERN Large Hadron Collider, well, you start getting subatomic particles. So we know the two are interchangeable. We know that warping of space-time can be done by either one. So let's say hypothetically here, okay, you have two people standing on Earth, and Earth, because of the mass of Earth, is pulling us all down towards the center equally at 9.8 meters per second squared. Well, not equally, it probably pulls on me a little more, but about 9.8 meters per second squared for all of us, right? Universal. And so let's say the person over here on the left was a little more clever than the average bear and had the ability to create a bubble around themselves that insulated themselves from the effects of Earth's gravity. Well, not only would you not need wings anymore and an engine to fly around because gravity doesn't affect you that way, but time itself would be affected. The way you experience time inside that bubble would be a little bit different than the way the rest of us chickens outside that bubble experience time. Because remember, it's space-time. They are interconnected. You can't affect one without the other. And if you remember when the CERN Large Hadron Collider were doing their experiments about 8 years ago, there was this declaration that we're reaching energy levels now sufficient enough to create micro black holes. Everybody freaked out. Oh, you're going to suck the Earth into a micro black hole. That's not what they were saying. What they were simply saying is that they're reaching sufficient energy levels now to warp space-time on itself at the nano level, creating these little black holes, these little bubbles. So it's not just theoretically possible. We just don't have the technology yet to make it really big, but we've seen it in laboratories. So why is that important? Well, let's talk about that bubble for a minute. Okay? These are the morphologies that people typically discuss when they talk about observing or report seeing regarding UFOs. Right? You have discs, the sports model, you've got the cigar or the rod shape, you have the much larger triangle shape, and in very rare occasions you have a really, really substantially large, huge boomerang shape. Why is that? And does that have anything to do with the propulsion? Does it have anything to do with these bubbles? Well, again, if you talk to the physicists at the Pentagon and the CIA, this was all part of the aha moment in 2015. So let's take our little bubble here, okay? How do you create a bubble? Well, it's not with a lot of mass, because if you did that, you need something about the size of Earth to compete with Earth's gravity. You'd perturb everything on the planet. So we're pretty sure that's being done with energy, a lot of energy. And also, perhaps the skin of the UAP may have something to do with it. There may be an interaction between the energy that is being radiated out and the skin. So it's not like you have a car where you have an engine under the hood. It's like the skin of the car is part of the engine. Very, very unusual. And so you put this really highly energetic energy source that interacts and all of a sudden now creates a bubble. Now, let's talk about this bubble for a second. Think of a diving bell. Let's do a little mental exercise. If you wanted to create a vehicle, a car, that could fit inside this bubble, keeping in mind at no time do you want any part of yourself outside the bubble and inside the bubble, because you get instantaneous disintegration of matter right at that terminus. So you want to be safe and secure inside that bubble. What is the only shape in geometry that allows you, think of a diving bell, that allows you to be protected on all sides equally 360 degrees inside a bubble? Anybody? Sphere. That's right. But a sphere, it's kind of hard to land, kind of rolls around, and it's probably not the best way to get around. So if I take a sphere and I flatten it, what is that? It's a disk. And it's still being protected all around 360 degrees. The problem is that this bubble, the energy used to create this bubble, it's limited. The bubble isn't forever, but you can't make a huge bubble. And there's an old saying in the US Navy, how many nuclear reactors do you put on a ship? The answer is as few as possible, because when something goes wrong, it goes really wrong, right? So, same thing here. You have a power source potentially in the middle, pushing out, creating this bubble around a vehicle, and now I can fit myself, my spouse, and my 2 kids in, right? But 43 feet isn't really big. Maybe it's like, I don't know, the Chevy Malibu, right? So I need something bigger. Family's getting bigger. Now I've got the in-laws I got to take care of. I've got cousins, and now my spouse brought her family. So the family's growing. So I need a bigger vehicle, but the problem is I'm still limited by the bubble size. So how do I make one bigger? Well, I could, in theory, put 2 of these bubbles together, put 2 of these discs together. But what is that? That's a rod, guys. It's a cigar. And that may explain why these cigars are fundamentally larger than the discs. There's a propulsion unit, one on each end of the rod. Well, guess what? Now my kids have kids, my grandmother's now involved, and I've got a huge family. I need something bigger. Well, how do I do that while keeping, think economy of scale, how do I minimize the number of propulsion units while maximizing my real estate, my car size, right? Well, it turns out, any of you remember Pythagorean theorem, right? What happens if I go out 90 degrees right out the middle? Think of a 3-legged stool. What is that? Triangle. And you ever notice how people report these luminous lights on the apex of the triangle? Yeah, they're not lights. Chances are those are part of the propulsion unit. What you're witnessing is what we call a Doppler redshift blue shift. And what it may be coming out in one frequency, perhaps microwave or even soft X-ray, is either being blue shifted or red shifted to the visible light spectrum. They're not navigational lights. The reality is that they're probably part of the propulsion. And then some people report really big triangles, right? I need something even bigger. And what happens? Well, you can do that. You can put another light in the middle, which a lot of these triangles have been reported by military pilots, intelligence officials, with having not only luminous lights on the apex of the triangle, but also one in the middle. And these are really large craft, right? So these are bubble makers. The problem is, I need something bigger. And unfortunately, at this point, we run out of options. There is no more shapes in geometry that allow us to have this economy of scale while maximizing our real estate. So we're forced to basically daisy chain them together, right? Just put a whole bunch of bubble makers together, and that is your boomerang. Huge, sometimes reported with 9, 10, 11 lights. Again, they're probably not lights. They're more than likely, they're probably propulsion units, bubble makers. And that's why they're reported, as you see here in this back picture here, looking like that. And so this was really revelatory for us, and that may explain why the discs tend to be smaller, more sports cars type, while your rods and your cigars tend to be a little bit larger, your triangles tend to be really, really large, and the very rare, sometimes seen, boomerang shape. Okay? So that was the aha moment. But there's something else we didn't talk about yet. The 6th observable. Remember, this is an effect observable, not a performance observable. And it also scares people. It's biological effects. You might be surprised to know that there are medical doctors in the US government that are actively seeing patients right now in the Department of Defense and the CIA and other members of the intelligence community who have come up close and personal to a UAP and are now under medical care. You might also be surprised to learn that there are individuals, whom I know, 2 of them, who are on permanent medical disability by the United States government, and the paperwork specifies because of their involvement in a UAP encounter. Okay. Good taxpayer dollars are paying their medical care and their disability. Right? You don't hear about that on the news, do you? All right, so let's talk about biological effects. Here's our little man again. It turns out that the doctors said, look, there are these zones of danger. A lot of folks will say, you know, I saw a UAP, I kind of got close to one, sir. I was in my F-18 and flying around, all of a sudden the thing goes whizzing past me, and now I've got this like weird sunburn. Guess what you do? It's called radiation burn, right? Because this is highly energetic. This is pumping out a lot of energy, and you're probably getting exposed to UV radiation amongst other forms of radiation. And if I get a little closer, what happens? Well, then you become the patient of one of the doctors who I personally know in the US government, who's actually triaging and providing care to some of our members of the military who've come a little too close and now sustained internal injuries. Injuries consistent liver damage, heart damage, kidney damage, and even morphological changes in the brain, the quadrant pituitary part of the brain. And yes, we actually have MRI scans of actual patients, government personnel, and you can see a before and after picture where that part of the brain has changed after an experience with the UAP. And then zone 3, something really interesting happens. Rarely, but you'll have somebody report, Lou, this is the most bizarre thing, but it felt like 5 minutes went by when I saw this thing. But when I looked at my clock, back there, it was 30 minutes had gone by. But I only used 5 minutes of fuel. How is that possible? Well, the theory is, with some of our folks in the Pentagon, is that as you get close to this event horizon, if you will, or this terminus, it's a soft terminus. It's not a hard terminus. The bubble, edge of the bubble, isn't so well defined. And so what winds up happening is if you get too close to it while they're juicing it up, you start to begin to experience space-time more relative to inside the bubble than outside the bubble. And when I say space-time, we talk about these things, these instantaneous acceleration, these things moving around like crazy. What's happening is not that they're performing these incredible feats at high Gs. If you were inside that bubble looking out, we would all be walking in slow motion. They're not going that fast if you were inside the bubble. And this is all part of Einstein's theories of relativity. And it's a little bit advanced, but certainly more advanced than I can really comprehend. But the bottom line is that you begin to experience space-time more relative to being inside the bubble. And so all these fantastical feats that we're seeing outside the bubble, if you were inside the bubble, wouldn't be that fantastic. You wouldn't be experiencing these high G forces. Everybody outside would be walking in, like I said, very slow motion. So now what I want to do is talk a little bit about secrets. Why? Because AATIP and other programs, Blue Book, right? OSAP, what else? ARROW, AOMISG, the UAP Task Force. They're all about secrets. And they were operating in secret for a very long time. And there's a long history of US government involvement in the UAP topic. And I'm going to show you that as well. But let's talk about secrets. Okay? We have a long history of secrets. Going back to the 1940s, Navajo wind talkers who helped win World War II against the Germans because the German code breakers could not understand the Navajo language. It was so specific to the indigenous people that there was no reference for it. There was no rules like Latin has rules. And so they were very successful in communicating back and forth for the United States. Of course, you have the 1950s, the SOSUS program. What's the Navy SOSUS program that's using hydrophones? Microphones underwater. To do what? To detect Soviet submarines. And guess what? It worked. Right? 1970s, remote viewing by the CIA to conduct psychic espionage against its enemies. 1980s, the introduction in 1989 during Operation Just Cause in Panama. The world saw for the first time the U.S. government cracked the code on stealth technology when we displayed the F-117 strike fighter for the first time in Panama during Operation Just Cause. The code name of that was actually Wildly Goblin because the plane flew terrible. But that program had been going on for decades. It was actually part of tacit blue and half blue programs. Long before the Americans, we ever admitted to our own people that we had this technology. We did. Right? Later on in the 1990s, the B-2 bomber, the Valkyrie, in the 2000s, the CIA's use of black sites to support renditions, detention, interrogations. The American people didn't know we were doing that until it got leaked. Right? So there's reasons why we have secrets. And there's good reasons, and then there's bad reasons. So let's talk about the first one, which I agree with this. We keep secrets, not from you, but we can't keep a secret. We can't tell you a secret, all the American public, without the risk of it getting into the wrong hands of our adversaries. Right? So we don't want to broadcast to our enemies what we know and what technologies we have, and also what we don't know, our intelligence gaps. Right? Those vulnerabilities, those key vulnerabilities. You don't want to let the Russians or the Chinese or North Koreans or anybody, Iranians or anybody else know that. So there's reason, and at the same time, if you look at the height of the Cold War with the United States and Russia at the time, it was kind of a winner-takes-all chess game, right? The last thing we wanted to do was compromise national security secrets. And here's some real examples. On the top left is the Boeing space plane still conducting secret missions. Your government is not telling you what it's doing, and I'm not allowed to tell you, but it's doing good stuff. How about on the right? Anybody know what that is? That's right. Say it again. The Chronoplan, otherwise known as AKA the Caspian Sea Monster. That's right. It's neither plane nor boat, is it? It is actually called a wing-in-ground effect vehicle. It has 8 to 10 high bypass turbofan jet engines. It's larger than a 747, can carry up to 800 people, and also missiles. And you know what? It neither flies nor floats. It's not a boat or a plane. What it does, it creates a cushion of air right underneath it. It goes maybe about 10 feet above the water, where a torpedo can't hit it and sonar can't find it, but low enough, because it's not flying, that radar can't pick it up. Those clever Ruskies. Brilliant. They came up with that. How about the image on the bottom right? Anybody know what that is? I mean, it's a super gravitational torpedo, but what does that do? That's a Russian torpedo. Well, normal torpedoes are fired out of a tube, usually out of a submarine, but can be also a plane and things like that. And they have a limitation of how fast they can go. Why? Because of water resistance. So most torpedoes, I can't tell you how fast they go, but they can do pretty fast. Maybe 50, 60 miles an hour underwater, maybe a little faster perhaps. But they're limited because of the friction of the water. So what did the Russians do? Well, they created a rocket-powered torpedo. They put a needle out the front. They redirect some of the exhaust out the front of this needle, creating a bubble. And the torpedo literally flies underwater at many hundreds of miles an hour. That's right. So these are examples of countries, including us, who want to keep secrets from each other. Right? We don't want to let them know what we have, and they don't want to let us know what they have, and that's why we have spies. Okay? There's also another reason why we have secrets, which, by the way, for the record, I don't agree with this. So please understand, I don't. But we have secrets to deliberately keep them away from the American people. Now that sounds kind of counterproductive, but we do it. Now why do we do it? Well, maybe it's because we don't want any political pressure from Congress kind of poking their head and asking what we're spending our money on, right? Like UAP research. Maybe we don't want to have any additional scrutiny by the media, right? Those clever little people that love to get in and get into your business, right? They're very good at what they do. And there's a lot of people in the government that don't want press or media attention for whatever reason, right? So there's a whole lot of reasons here. You can see here, I'm not going to go through each and every one of them. I don't want to just read off the slide, but you can see for yourself. Let's go through some examples. Okay, what are we looking at here? Well, this middle picture here is one of the atom bombs, right? And we didn't know we were developing this through the Manhattan Project until when we actually dropped one in Hiroshima, right? Let's see here, Kennedy assassination. Some of those files are still classified. Still. Why? Well, because there's some stuff in there that probably won't look very good for us. There's some people that are going to be asking some very difficult questions if they're still alive. Area 51, we know it exists, but you know what they're doing there? No. How about this picture here? This one here on the bottom right. Anyone know what that is? That is a picture of the U-2 spy plane. This is really interesting. This really drives the point that I'm trying to make here. So in the 1950s, we had a treaty with then Soviet Union that we would not fly manned reconnaissance missions over mainland Russia. So what did we do? Well, we wanted to do just that. So we created a technology. The CIA had a contract with Lockheed Skunk Works to create the U-2 spy plane, a plane that would fly faster and higher than any other plane. In fact, so fast, so high that the Russians would never be able to detect it. And guess what? For the first few missions, it worked. The Russians didn't react. Mission success. That is until the Russians developed the SA-2 surface-to-air missile and successfully shot it down and paraded Powers, pilot, Captain Powers, in front of the world, in front of the United Nations, and the wreckage. The Russians had been tracking every single one of those flights, but never even admitted to their own people. This was happening until what? Until they had a solution. Why admit a problem? Why admit a vulnerability for which there is no solution? You spend a lot of your money and faith and confidence in our government to defend and protect you. How do you think the people will react if you find out that, oh, there's a threat out there that we can't defend against, right? That's not a really good conversation to have, especially as a politician, especially as a 4-star or 3-star general in the Pentagon. So maybe we should just kind of chair this conversation for a while until we know a little bit more what's going on, right? And then there's another reason why we keep secrets, which, by the way, for the record, I also disagree with this. To preserve the moral fabric of society. Believe it or not, there are examples where secrets have been made specifically because we were afraid of the implications it might have to the moral fiber of our communities. And yes, there are examples of that. For example, here on the far left, that is actually a UFO document. There's hundreds of these and hundreds of these between the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the CIA, the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of Defense, etc., etc. How about this down here? Anybody know what that is? Dead Sea Scrolls. That's right. Discovered when? 1947. But not the translation of which, by the way, was not released for many years afterwards. Why is that? Because they were afraid it would contradict the current understanding and the current notion of the Judeo-Christian belief system. It would disrupt society. And so they kept that. Scientists did. How about here on the right? Anybody know about MK Ultra? That's right. CIA, we actually gave out LSD to unsuspecting civilians, and then we monitored them and watched them. How about the Tuskegee experiments? Shameful. That's right. Remember that? Where some of you do. Where we actually allowed syphilis to progress to the point where individuals died even though we had a cure. We refused to administer it. Why? Because we wanted to see what would happen. And people died because of it. That's right. So there are secrets that are kept for the wrong reasons. So how long have we really known about UAPs? How long has your government been involved in this topic? Because I can tell you, it didn't start with AATIP and AATIP. It damn sure didn't start with my program. I'm going to take a moment here because I want to read something to you. This is very important. Because what I'm about to read you is real. It was highly classified until recently. And let me foot stomp and emphasize here. There are hundreds and hundreds of these documents that have now since been declassified. Anybody can read them, okay? So this is an official government. This, by the way, this kind of gets me a little animated because when you read it, hopefully you're going to get the same feelings that I have. This is a document, and let's go through this. I kind of dissect it. Let's look at the summary here, and I'm going to read this out for anybody back here. Summary of observations of aerial phenomena in the New Mexico area, December 1948 through May 1950. By the way, the date of this document, 25 May 1950. This is official U.S. government letterhead, by the way, right? So, it was determined that the frequency of unexplained aerial phenomena in the New Mexico area was such that an organized plan of reporting these observations should be undertaken. Aha! An investigation, right? The observers of these phenomena include scientists, special agents of Air Force OSI, airline pilots, military pilots, Los Alamos security inspectors, military personnel, and many other persons of various occupations whose reliability is not questioned, right? Trained observers, military people, scientists assigned to these facilities. And what's the morphology? Disks or variations. But here's the kicker. Let's read this last paragraph. This summary of observations of aerial phenomena has been prepared for the purpose of re-emphasizing and reiterating, so this is the first time someone's getting really upset here and frustrated, right? The fact that phenomena, not technology, phenomena have continuously occurred in the New Mexico skies during the past 18 months and are continuing to occur. And secondly, we're not done, we're not over, right? That these phenomena are occurring in the vicinity of sensitive military and government installations. That's not Lou Elizondo telling you, that's your government telling you this. And so when the Pentagon tells you, oh, no, we're not aware of anything historical, it's their report. That's theirs. So this is the frustration. This is why we have whistleblowers coming out now, because they've been part of these programs, right? And the bureaucracy won't allow the truth to come out and be provided to you. Why? Right? Not for reason number one, but for reasons number 2 and 3. And by the way, that's illegal, because you can only classify information to protect sources and methods. It's in fact, it is illegal to classify information to try to cover up malfeasance or to stop embarrassment to the United States government. It's illegal to do that. And yet we do that all the time. Lest we forget that it is government's job to serve the people, not the other way around. Roswell. What happened with Roswell? Well, the report came out, flying discs, flying saucers. But all of a sudden, the government realized it had a nightmare on its hand. Uh-oh, can't let the cat out of the bag. So within 24 hours, what happened? Oh, balloons. No, nothing to see here, folks. Kind of the same way they treated this is the way they treated my colleague, David Grush, who was a senior intelligence officer, and by the way, a military officer, who I served with at the U.S. Space Force. He came out within 24 hours. What happened? Some individuals leaked to the media his medical file for PTSD treatment, hoping to discredit him. How disgusting is that? Here's a patriot who put his life on the line and has now had sought treatment for PTSD, which, by the way, we encourage. And then we go ahead and release it, trying to discredit him. Shame on you. Whoever was responsible for that, right? Guess what, folks? We still don't know what the hell's in our skies. Sorry, we don't. Remember the drone flap in New Jersey? Yeah. Right? Remember that? All over the news. You might be surprised to know, some of you in the media probably remember this, but there was another drone incident, in fact, eerily similar to the New Jersey incident, that also got a lot of media attention in 2019 in Colorado and in Kansas and Nebraska. Remember that? Where you had law enforcement, FAA, and who else? The FBI involved. And by the way, if you want to compare and contrast the similarities between New Jersey and Colorado, well, let's take a look. On the left are all the similarities. On the right are the differences. 2. Yep, I'll give it to you. One was on the East Coast, one was over the Rocky Mountains. That's a difference. That's fair. And also on the right that there was a U.S. government explanation. What was it? It was FAA approved and it was authorized. Let's start with FAA approved. Was it FAA approved? Wrong. Nope. Just ask Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, who spoke to the head of the FAA. And what did they tell him? Not so. Well, but they're all authorized, Lou. Yeah, they're all authorized. Maybe the FAA didn't coordinate it very well, but they were still authorized. Nope. You don't close down sensitive military airspace and commercial air traffic for authorized drone use or commercial drone use. Okay? This is a problem, folks, and it frustrates me. And this is why I did what I did. Now, forget about this chubby guy here in the middle. Nobody cares about him. Let's look at these other guys for a second. Who's on the far left? None other than Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who was an admiral in the United States Navy and an eyewitness to the USS Roosevelt incidents, UAP incidents. And who else was he? He was also the deputy director of NOAA, who testified to Congress and the American people under oath, under penalty of law and imprisonment, to tell the truth. Who else was there? This guy on the far right, Mike Gold. Who's he? Well, he's from NASA. He's also a very, very good attorney. But what else is he? He's also one of the mission managers for none other than the Artemis moon mission. That's right. Testifying before the American people. And how about this guy here? Mike Schellenberger. A journalist. Testifying for the American people in front of Congress about this topic. That was monumental. These folks are going out there putting their credibility, their lives, and their futures on the line. Their credibility. Think of an admiral in the Navy talking about USOs and UFOs. NASA? The media, the press? This is serious, folks. This is happening. This is going on. Members of Congress are being briefed at the classified level. There are people in this administration right now, senior people, cabinet officials, that are taking this topic very, very seriously. People say, well, Lou, when are we going to have disclosure? I'd say we're in it. Disclosure isn't an event, it's a process, and we're there. It's happening. What happened? Well, how can you prove it, Lou? Well, let's look at it this way. You have a former president of the United States, Barack Obama, who said, yep, looks like these things are real. You have a former director of the CIA, Woolsey, yep. In fact, talk about a plane stopping in midair. Former director of national intelligence, Ratcliffe, who's now, by the way, what? Director of CIA, who said, yes, these are real. We don't know what they are, but they can outperform anything we have. Right? So this is important, and this conversation is important. By the way, let me say, the only reason why we're succeeding isn't because I have the least amount to it. We're succeeding because of you. Because every one of you having a conversation around the dinner table, around the water cooler at work, you're writing to your members of Congress, you're calling, you're telling the media you want the truth, you want them to report on this. There was a time this was political suicide. Any reporter who would try to report on this would never be, you'd be a tabloid reporter. Right? They're only doing this now because you are demanding it. So we are where we are today because of you. And I think that's very, very important. So, with that said, what I'm going to do now, I think I've been yammering quite a bit so far. So I'm going to open this up to some questions for you folks. First of all, there are no dumb questions. You can ask me anything you want. I will give you the answer, and if I can't tell you, I will tell you why. Either A, I don't know, or B, it might be classified so I can't talk about it. But with that said, and please don't be shy. This is supposed to be for everyone. So if you want to, we're going to pass the microphone around, so let's start with this gentleman right over here. So let's see if we can get over the microphone for you. Because I want everybody to hear your questions. We're doing on time. We're doing pretty good. I'm not boring you guys too bad, am I?
No, it's
okay.
Great.
Well, that's my wife. She'll try it. She's like, oh God. Yeah. I tell them. Here, no, take my mic.
Thanks, Lou. So, Lou, earlier in your presentation, you showed the famous tic-tac, go fast, and gimbal. If we were to table those for a moment, I'd love to know personally, what other story of all the stories out there, for example, Rendlesham Forest, Aerial School, Phoenix Lights, or maybe something else, what, again, other than tic-tac, go fast, gimbal, what is most intriguing to you?
Thank you. Great question. First of all, it's like choosing a favorite kid. I can't. They're all my favorites. Let me give you one that's very compelling, and I'll weave it into something current. 1999, call sign Spock. I'm not going to give you guys a real name. Helo pilot operating out of Puerto Rico is on a recovery mission. So once a month, the United States Navy would test fire a cruise missile over the waters in the Caribbean. It would run out of fuel, and it would drop into the ocean and sink. And at a predetermined time, it would blow its ballast, rise to the top, and a helo crew would come out and recover the missile, take it back to base, crack it open, and test for telemetry and fuel consumption, just making sure that the missile did what it was supposed to do. And by the way, these Tomahawk cruise missiles were potentially nuclear capable, meaning they could carry a nuclear payload if they needed to. This one didn't, by the way, it's just a test missile. So the helo crew's going out. You've got the pilot, you've got the co-pilot, you've got the crew chief in the back, and you've got a frogman dangling down the line about 3 feet over the water, about to hook the missile. All of a sudden, something as described as black as a devil and round in the size of a small island. You know, a submarine is pretty big. but it's not the size of a small island. It's certainly not round. It's not this shape. It starts to come towards the surface. Now, this missile that happens to be in a very deep part of the Caribbean. In fact, the second deepest part in the world, only second to Challenger Deep, right? The trench in Puerto Rico is like 22,000 feet deep. So the missile pops up, helo crew's about to grab it and recover, and all of a sudden this thing starts rising to the water. Water begins to churn, and all of a sudden the frogman is freaking out. He is literally trying to climb the line back up into the helicopter. The crew chief and everybody sees this thing. The pilot does an emergency ascent, doesn't know what the heck's going on, fearing for the life of the frogman, and all of a sudden the missile gets sucked underwater and the entire thing disappears, never to be seen again. To this day, the missile remains unaccounted for. Let's forward the tape. 3.5 years ago, forgive me, I can't go into a lot of detail with this, but I'm going to try to tell you as much as I can without getting into trouble. For the record, I do not look good in an orange jumpsuit, so I'm going to avoid that. There's a part of the world we're looking at in the water. You folks know how big an oil platform is, oil derrick, right? They're huge. They're like a small city. 5,000 people can live on one of these things while they're drilling for oil and things like that. They're huge oil platforms, several square blocks in some cases. Well, we have video evidence. I cannot tell you the capability or where it was, or why we were there. But there's a very high fidelity capability by a 3-letter agency that picked up something underwater, perfectly round and black, larger than the oil platform it is passing underwater, traveling at an estimated speed between 450 and 550 miles an hour. Right. But that's just one. There's a lot of this. And that's why we're trying like hell to get these released to the public. And this is why Congress wants more information. They're getting these briefings. And they're also told they can't tell you about it either. Right? So that frustrates them even more. It's rare during a hearing, we can go back to this hearing real quick here. Nancy Mace said something very interesting. For the first time in her professional career, she had never seen, at the conclusion of a hearing, a standing ovation. That wasn't for us. That was because of you. Because the American people demanded to know the truth. And Congress was doing its job. Okay, so, next question. Okay, let's, we got one over here. Okay.
So I noticed in this slide we have here.
Okay, that's an awful picture.
Well, no, my question is actually related to this. So it's a slide of the House Oversight hearing, and I noticed that behind you is Peter Skafish, the anthropologist, who has written a book called Rough Metaphysics, and in the acknowledgments of that book, he mentions you and says... Not
deserved, by the way.
Well,
he's a great guy. I do not deserve those accolades.
He is a great guy. And he says, I hope he, i.e. you, finds an answer here to his question of how to think rationally about the irrational. So I'm wondering how Skafish's study of the medium Jane Roberts, who channeled the set material, has helped further your understanding of the phenomenon.
Wow. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. In order to understand something, a lot of times the challenge isn't the object you're trying to understand. The challenge is ourselves. It's human cognitive dissonance, right? It's human bias. And it's unavoidable. Why? Because we're humans. It's instinctual. We're born that way. There are things that we were born with that probably from an evolutionary perspective helped save us at some point in the past. There are capabilities, for example, things like remote viewing that are now very well understood, but have statistically been proven to work to the point where we actually use them at the CIA, the DOD, and the Army, and everything else, right? To conduct espionage. And you have to really kind of go into the question of what is remote viewing? And you mean to tell me like psychics are real? Well, I don't know, talk to a cop. Use them a lot to solve murders, right? The reality is we don't understand the human brain very well, or even what human consciousness is. You ask anybody in this group, and I'll bet you everybody will give you a different definition of what human consciousness is. Some people will sit in the lotus position and tell you it's the world, that's a flower about to blossom. Others will tell you, it's probably based on quantum entanglement. At the end of the day, we are spiritual beings, I believe. It's the reason why we love. It's the reason why we fear. Two of the primary motivations of what we do. And now that we know a little bit about quantum physics, is it possible that time, and we know that time and space is compressible, and we know that the possibility of other dimensions exists, like M theory, string theory, right? Is that where consciousness relies? Is it reside there? And so I often try to, I'm kind of a simple guy. I'm not really smart, so I have to use analogies a lot. So I kind of look at it this way. Imagine time is like a cigar. Imagine the ashes of the cigar is the past. And imagine the cigar that hasn't ignited yet as being the future, right? And imagine the present as being the cherry, the moment of ignition of that cigar. Now, if I were to ask you the question, or any of you the question, what is your most simplest definition of the past? In less than a sentence. Most people would agree, most simplest terms, okay, things that have already happened. Something that happened, okay? And by that same rationale, what's the future? Well, things that haven't happened yet. So what's the present? Well, the present isn't a moment of time. The present's actually a transitory process. It's a very, very infinitesimally small moment of space-time where the future is becoming the past. It's a transition process. And so just like that cigar, if you were to look at the cherry of that cigar, remove some of the glare and really magnify, you would notice that the cigar burns unevenly. That moment where the tobacco leaf becomes ash, if you looked at that cherry, you would see that there are moments where there's pre-ignition, and there's moments where the ash can actually be in front of the tobacco and vice versa. And so, or you can look at maybe perhaps a cigarette. And so perhaps human consciousness and remote viewing is really just people that have the ability where that cherry is a little bit bigger, where in essence, more elements of the future and more elements of the past are experienced as if they're happening now. Is that possible? Is that where it lies? Well, we know that a lot of scientists now, particularly neuroscientists, believe that human consciousness may be a quantum process, quantum entanglement. And if that's the case, that would certainly explain that. Because we know, for example, through quantum mechanics, there was a time when I went to school that we learned that an electron orbited an atom. And we realized that's absolutely preposterous. It's not like a little satellite that orbits. It's actually now called an electron cloud for a reason. Because the electron is both there and it's not all at the same time. In fact, some scientists now speculate the electron is so small that it's actually ebbing in and out of existence. It's weaving its way through the fabric of space-time and popping in and out of our dimensions trillions of times per second. And it's possible that it may be going somewhere else, to another dimension perhaps, right? So there's a lot of theory right now on that, and that gets into a much more interesting conversation later, which we certainly don't have time to talk about, which goes into the discussion of, you now hear the term psionics, right? A lot of people are taking that very seriously. I was a nuts and bolts guy, so I really can't talk in an authoritative manner on that. But, there's more information that may be coming out. So, wonderful question. I don't think I can answer it because I just don't know. But I think there's a lot of possibilities, and I think we have to keep an open mind. My perspective, we need to keep all options on the table until they're no longer on the table. So.
About if psychic abilities are real, but I guess I would also add to that, ask a mother if psychic abilities are real
100%.
and if they know what's going on with their child. And I think that's a huge voice that's
100%.
missing from this conversation.
Look,
I would
you're
love
absolutely right.
To add. No, I'm not challenging you, I'm adding to it. So just, thank you.
Sure, I'll share with you something else if I may. I was asked a very interesting question 3 days ago. A question I'd never been asked before. And I'm going to share it with you because I think it was a damn good question. Someone asked me, Lou, if you had only one question to ask to a non-human intelligence, alien popped up today, right now on stage, and you could only ask her one question, what would it be? And I thought about that. And I said, my question would be, do you have the capacity to understand and feel love? Now, why did I ask that? Do I really care if it has the ability to love? Well, I kind of do, because really, As a human being, there's two primary motivations in 99% of the decisions we make as human beings. We're motivated by love, and we're motivated by fear. Fear is why we go to war, fear is why we do what we have, fear is why we have racism. Love is why a mother will run out in traffic in the face of assured death to protect her child, right? These two fundamental emotions drive 99% of our decision making as human beings. And it's important because we look at everything in anthropomorphic views. It's the reason why I have my German Shepherds by people names and why I talk to them like little babies, and because that's what we do as humans. We look at everything in human terms. We can't help it. We're wired that way. So even my boat, I call it a girl. She's beautiful, right? We do it instinctually. We put anthropomorphic values on things that are distinctly not human because we are human. We don't know what else to do. That's how we relate. So if you want to know if an NHI you can communicate with and has a capacity you could even talk to or relate to or bargain with, does it have the ability to understand love? Because if it does, then we have a pretty damn good chance of maybe being able to relate and communicate and maybe even thrive. But if it doesn't, and it's like artificial intelligence, it's binary, information in, information out, then where do we start? Where do we even begin to have that conversation? And not only with the NHI, but with ourselves, because how do you relate to something that's distinctly not human, right? We ascribe motivations and intentions and emotions to everything we do. And if you're dealing with something that can't do that, then how are we going to communicate? Right? So very, very, very thoughtful question. Thank you so much. Okay, another question. Okay, we're going to get to you guys.
All right, I got you.
Yes, sir.
First of all, great question. Hard to follow that up, but okay.
I'm a Gemini. I like long walks on the beach.
I'm gonna lead this in.
Long walk. Be honest.
You're in the Bible Belt,
Yes, sir.
right? In Georgia, there's church everywhere, and so you have religion and you have faith. You have Jesus. You have Bible stories. You have years of people going to church.
Mm-hmm.
This seems to go against UAPs, UFOs, phenomena, science of this type of conversation seems to go against. Now, I get it, but how do we get this conversation together?
Great question. Thank you for asking that. Wonderful question. Well, first of all, let me start by giving a little history on a gentleman named Galilei, who proposed a different model of the Earth-centric model of our solar system and proposed a heliocentric model of our solar system. He said, actually, the universe doesn't revolve around Earth, the Earth revolves around the sun. And unfortunately, at the time, the church persecuted him, almost killed him for it, and he had to recant. In fact, they refused to even look through the very telescope that would have proved his thesis. Now we look back and say that's silly. That notion did not at all threaten religion. It did not threaten the notion of God. It did not threaten the Bible. What it threatened was our understanding or misunderstanding of God. It didn't threaten God at all. What it threatened was our ignorance of God, right? And then I think if you look at things too from a spiritual perspective, I'm working now with a group of spiritual leaders. I am myself a very spiritual person. I don't wear it on my sleeve because I respect everybody's opinion, but I am deeply religious. A lot of people find that surprising, but I am very religious. And it doesn't bother me at all because I think the dominion of God, there's no limitations. It's only our understanding. Remember, let me give you a perfect example. In science, when I was in the medical program, we learned a lot of crap that wasn't real, wasn't true. We talked a little bit before about like acupuncture, but let me give you an example. Homo sapiens sapien has been around from an anthropological perspective, not religious perspective, it's anthropologists believe that human beings have been around for roughly the last 200 to 400,000 years in modern form. Again, anthropological, not religious. So let me caveat. If that is the case, if you look at a 24-hour clock, it was the Greeks 2,000 years ago that proposed there's only two fundamental forms of life on this planet. You are either A, a plant, or B, an animal. And we fall under that category of animals. And it wasn't until the Renaissance, or roughly 350 years ago, where all of a sudden we discovered an entirely new form of life on this planet that is neither plant or animal. And on a 24-hour clock is like the last maybe 4 minutes before midnight, we discovered that. And it's the world of fungus. And so we pat ourselves on the shoulder and say, what a clever little monkey we are. And it wasn't until about the last 2 seconds before the stroke of midnight on this 24-hour clock, 120 years ago, that we had the technology to actually discover the true alpha life form on this planet. And in fact, if you were to take all the biomass of every plant, all the biomass of every animal, and all the biomass of every fungus, and add it all together, it still will not add up to the hidden biomass of this true alpha life form that's been on this planet all along. That is the dominant life form. And it wasn't until we could curve glass, stick it in a little metal tube, and famously shout the words, little beasties, did we discover the world of microorganisms, right? That are inside every one of us, that make us up. We always try to put Mother Nature in a box. We also try to put religion in a box. And every time we try to put God or nature or religion in a box, we're usually wrong. Mother Nature always figures a way to wiggle herself out of the box. There was a time I was told in college that all life form derived from photosynthesis. Wrong. In fact, if you go to the bottom of the ocean to where the black smokers are, there are animal life forms that thrive off of chemosynthesis. Quite happy with it. In fact, when I was in school, I was told, oh, all life form has to have oxygen. Wrong. Clostridium botulism. It's an anaerobe. It will die in the presence of oxygen. Okay? Microorganisms live literally in places they shouldn't be able to. They live on the skin of the ISS space station. They live in miles underneath the Arctic ice. Right? Now, are they defying life? No, they're defying our definition of life. They're defying our understanding. But they're not defying God. They're not defying nature. What they're defying is our ignorance. And I think religion is the same way. This is why we need to have in this conversation of religion, we need religious leaders. We need religious leaders of all faiths, from all walks of life, to be part of this conversation. And you'd be pleased to know that I'm part of a group of those folks. I won't say who they are, but they are international and they represent their senior people of all different faiths. And this conversation is exactly what they have. Exactly. Because at the end of the day, faith is an intimate part of our experience, for many people. Not everybody, but for many people. And it's tough to reconcile when you're talking about the topic of UAP, and then you read scripture and say, well, I think this is contradicting. Oh, are we sure? Is it really contradicting, or is it just contradicting our understanding of the scripture, right? So I think, yeah, it's certainly a challenge. But I'm not qualified to answer that, so all I do is get a whole bunch of folks together, and that group keeps getting bigger and bigger. I am not an expert, I am not a theologian, so let me just caveat that, and I have very little to say in that group. I'm kind of like the comic relief, to be honest with you, in that group. Because every time I say something, it's usually really, really dumb. So, but those conversations are happening, and I think you're right. I think we have to remember I hate to say the sins of our past, but we need to remember that we've made a lot of mistakes before in the name of religion. By the way, we still make those mistakes. I don't think this is a topic at all that challenges the notion of God. In fact, I would submit to you that it probably, if you're religious, might even make you more religious. Because what it does is expand the notion of how big this universe is and what could possibly be, right? And how special we are as human beings, right? So great question. Again, I'm sorry I couldn't answer it fully because I'm just not qualified. But that's my perspective. Thank you so much, very thoughtful. Okay, we got more questions coming.
Is this our last question? I believe we have questions on time for one more question.
Okay, I'm sorry guys. And they got to be out of here by 10:15. They have to keep me out of here, so I'm sorry. But what we'll do is when we go out, we'll sign.
There will be time to ask questions too at the merch signing as well, so you officially don't get it.
Hello, Mr. Elizondo.
Oh, I'm just Lou. Mr. Elizondo's my dad. I'm
All
just
right.
hating you.
First,
Thank you, though.
Let me say thank you for your sacrifices that you
Oh,
made
no.
in your career.
I appreciate that. It's undeserved, but I appreciate
It's
it.
very well deserved. My question is this. What are the things that you know that we know, that we have access to as the public, to put that on a scale at, I don't know where at, but compared to what you know, what percentage of knowledge would you say we have compared to what you know?
I hate to do a comparison like that, like between scale of 1 to 10. This is my problem, because the general public is not informed as much as they should be. I know a lot, but it's not because I'm smart. Just I happen to be in the program for almost a decade, right? and you pay for it, your tax dollars. And it frustrates me because you pay for something that you deserve the results of. But they're being sequestered, they're being withheld from you. And more importantly, they're being withheld from presidents and members of Congress who have an authority, who have a right to know what's going on. They have an oversight responsibility. The President of the United States, the Chief Executive Officer, right, who enforces the law of the land, he has a right to know. He should be told this stuff. Members of Congress, the Gang of Six, the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, the House committees as well. These are people who are read on, they're supposed to know. And you pay them to manage and have oversight of these type of programs. And when they're not being informed, that means the system is broke. And we have to fix it. I took an oath years ago to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I've been through 2 wars, and it turns out the enemy all along was the bureaucracy. And so this is why we have to have this conversation as a people. I've never been relieved of that oath. I'm still held to it, and I still believe in it. My family, we're immigrants. My father came from Cuba as an exile for his participation in the Bay of Pigs. This country afforded us opportunities nobody else did. You know, this is a wonderful country. There was a time my father came to this country. I'll share this with you. It's very personal. My father came to this country in the early 1960s after being released from Castro's jails with some of the other Cuban exiles who were part of the CIA operation. And he went to go get a job. And you know what? There was a sign on the door that said, "No dogs, no blacks, and no Cubans allowed." Think about that, right? Ignorance. Ignorance is a disease. And it's not just stuff like that. Because we see where that leads. That leads to racism and division. Okay? This topic has been withheld from you. I can only fear what the implications of that are. You deserve this information. You paid for the damn information. So this is what drives myself and others, like other whistleblowers, and this is why we need to protect whistleblowers so they don't have to go through what I went through. And the death threats, and having my security clearance, and having people trying to go ahead and investigate me. Right? Fortunately, I survived all that. Thankfully, thank God. But you know what? There's a lot of other people that didn't. They had their lives ruined because of that. All because someone didn't want to tell you the truth. So I believe the truth shall set you free. I've always believed that. Now, do I believe in national security secrets? Sure. But only for reasons number 1, not number 2 and number 3. And so, but thank you, sir. That's a very good question. I appreciate it very much. I don't know if I answered it for you. I think you probably, I don't want to say scale of 1 to 10. If you know, let's say 2, I would know 8, right? Because there's a lot I still don't know. I only know what I know. You don't know what you don't know, right? So, but I know a lot because of my experience. So do my colleagues, and I think it needs to come out. So hopefully that gap gets smaller. Because there shouldn't be. Maybe there might be a couple of things to protect sources and methods that I know, but everything else, look, this is a topic, folks. I just had this conversation with a gentleman who met me back in the back room there. This is a conversation from a national security perspective, fine. Let the 3- and 4-star generals figure it out. But this is a conversation that affects each and every one of you equally and yet differently, depending how you were raised and your cultural backgrounds and your religious affiliations, right? This is a conversation that affects us psychologically. It affects us sociologically, it affects us theologically, and it affects us philosophically. And I damn sure don't want some 3- or 4-star general telling you what I need to think about this topic, or what you need to think about this topic, right? You need to figure out what this topic means to you, and you need to figure out what it means to you, and you need to figure out what it means to me. You don't need some guy up on the stage telling you what to think about this. And that's why, if you notice, I don't tell you what to think about it. I just give you the facts and the data. Here you go, this is what we found out, and you figure it out, right? The problem is we've spent way too long keeping this topic in the dark, keeping it secret, and then trying to create a narrative around it. And I think that's dangerous. I think the sooner we can level the playing field, the sooner the public has access to the information that we do, again, minus the sources of method, which I think we can do, the better off we're going to be. And maybe restore a little faith and confidence in our government and have it work the way it's supposed to work. So, okay, folks, I'm so sorry I can't take any more questions. I'm getting the big hook to go off, but thank you so much for coming out. It's truly my honor and privilege. I really appreciate it, folks. Thank you. And a big shout out to the folks to the city winery here in Atlanta. Thank you. from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, folks. Have a wonderful evening. And if you want, if you bought a book, I'm happy to sign it for you and talk to you out there. So God bless y'all. Thank you.